past, I've talked about, oh, Resident Evil, that franchise gave me reparable childhood trauma. Yet, I still love it a lot. And that is true, and there is a reason I stuck with this series despite the damage it did to me. And that is because I am way too attached to the story, the lore, the characters, but most specifically, the monsters. Yeah, the Resident Evil monsters, or BOWs if you prefer, are some of my favorite aspects about these games. I just love how vastly different and insane these designs can get. I love learning about their biology, their movesets, their designs, the ways in which they can finish you off, and of course, their origins. From humans, cockroaches, plants, gorillas, and even Mexicans. These viruses have been applied to all sorts of living beings, and because of that, I'm going to talk about the 10 coolest monsters or BOWs in the Resident Evil series. Let me just clarify something. I have not played every Resident Evil game, but I have read almost all of the Resident Evil lore. Does that make me the most qualified person to talk about this topic? Maybe not, you might notice some bias for certain games, but at the very minimum, I can deliver to you a fun and entertaining video. So, wanna get started? When I was first exposed to Resident Evil as a kid, there's two things I vividly remembered. Being scared by the first zombie cutscene, but also the utter shock I felt when I saw a hunter decapitate a player for the first time. This was easily one of the worst things I've ever seen at that time, yes, even with the PS1 graphics. Seeing a hunter snap your head away made me utterly terrified of them. Even to this day, I still tend to get a bit nervous whenever one shows on screen, which is funny because, with only a few exceptions, hunters are not always insta-kills. They can decapitate you, but only if you're low on health. But even then, just the sole fact that they can pull that off is a genuinely terrifying thought for me. It also doesn't help how agile, strong, and resilient they tend to be, which adds a lot of stress when fighting them. Even so, while the hunters cause me a trauma that kinda persists to this day, I still find them really damn cool. Their amphibian designs with their giant claws makes them so iconic. What I also like about the hunters is that, besides the zombies, they've been one of the most consistent threats throughout the series, being present in almost every game pre-RE4, with so many hunter variants that look so cool. You got the alphas, betas, gammas, R, elites, and even more unique species like the farfarello which could turn invisible. Here's a question for you. If hunters are so cool, then how come there's no hunter to— oh god damn it, they actually exist? You know, I'm curious about something. When compared to the Lickers, which one do you think is more iconic? Like, I know it sounds silly, but I feel that these two monsters share a few similarities gameplay-wise, and are both very iconic when it comes to representing older Resident Evil games. I mean, I think both of them are really cool, but of course, I have my own hunter bias. Because of trauma, but still bias. So let me know what you think in the comments. There's an old saying that goes, sometimes less is more. And I think the giant alligator from Resident Evil 2 is the perfect example of that, because seriously, just by his name alone I already described what I like so much about this monster. Giant alligator! Did I say more? Well, I can try. Of course, as it is obvious at this point, I think alligators are very cool. But what I like about this monster specifically is that you find him in the sewers. This is a great way to reference that urban legend of people flushing baby alligators through the toilet and ended up making the sewers their habitat. This monster leaves a great impression on you due to his sheer size. I'm especially fond of his design in the remake. He's just so imposing and scary, and goes a step beyond in making him look a bit more unique. His battles are honestly quite simple. Hell, in the remake, it's just a pseudo quick-time event. But the most brutal part about him is how you deal with him, as the most efficient way to take him out is to force him to bite into a fuel canister and shoot it while he has it in his mouth, which will cause his head to explode in pieces. It's so brutal, but man, it is so satisfying. Unless you're playing the Dark Side Chronicles. That death isn't very satisfying in that game. But really, what else can I say? Simple battle, simple enemy, but it's more than enough to make him a memorable monster. Resident Evil Revelations is a game that gives me a lot of mixed feelings. Like, it's good, I like it, but I feel that it's not scary enough, and it's so weird because most of the game takes place at sea, and there's even underwater sections. That should be very scary. The enemies are gross and even unnerving to look at, but they really don't make me panic or scream. And the story, I honestly barely remember it if I am honest. Again, it's not a bad game, but I just really wish it was scarier. Which is funny because I'm kinda easy to scare. However, there's one thing about it that I remember very well and actually shocked me at how good and disturbing it was. This cactus enemy. This monster is insane in all aspects. From his appearance, this cactus is a grotesque looking ooze that underwent extra mutation. As such, he's taller, pudgier, and even more disproportionate than your average monster. He has two heads, one that resembles a big gaping mouth, and the other which is the head of the infected person. On the left side, he has some severely deformed arms, while the right arm resembles a bossa which he uses as a main way of insta-killing you. But the most disturbing part about this monster is his lore. Skagdeads are regular humans that were infected with the T-Abyss virus, but presented stronger than average resistance to it. Since the virus took a longer time to spread, it caused even more horrible mutations on the host. Only a few people managed to turn to Skagdeads, but an even lesser number of victims managed to retain a semblance of humanity. When Jill Valentine and Parker Luciani are looking for the comms officer, they find out that he's mutated into this grotesque creature. The craziest part about this is that when they fight him, he keeps speaking full words to them, constantly saying,
Mayday, Mayday, don't feel like myself anymore. Stop it! I'm a human! Human! Stop, 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 stop! Please stop! I'm human!
It's simultaneously scary and horrible! And it also doesn't help that his boss battle is kinda hard actually. Don't underestimate the Skagdead's slow speed. He's capable of setting organic bear traps all over the place to easily close the gap on you. And sure, there are plenty of easy ways to outmaneuver him. But even then, his arena is filled with other strong oozes that can easily kill you if you're not careful. Also, did I remind you that the Skagdead has an insta-kill attack? Yeah, it's very crazy to me that this is the very first boss in the entire game. But you know, crazy difficulty aside, he made for a hell of an impression, which made him land on the 8th spot on this list. You know, there's many ways to make a great monster. Make them look scary, make them be a constant threat, make them grotesque. In Margaret Baker's case, she's all three. When I close my eyes and think about the scariest moments in Resident Evil 7, Margaret Baker always pops up, and for good reason. Every single scenario that involves her is either extremely tense, scary, or both. Margaret, like other people infected with the mold, gains a bunch of superhuman abilities, such as extra strength and speed, as well as having a strong regenerative factor that quickly heals her wounds. On top of that, she can also command a bunch of insects and can transform into a terrifying creature, which I'll get to later. The biggest strength about Margaret as a monster is that every single time she shows up, she'll make sure that you remember how horrifying she is. You have the part where you play as Mia Winters, where if she catches you, it's like There's the old house section where she gets you with a jump scare.
I told you to stay out of here!
We can't forget the bedroom DLC where you have to ensure she doesn't find out about your escape attempt. And it is so damn nerve-wracking knowing she's getting closer as you put everything in place so she doesn't suspect you. And of course, to top it all off, there's her battle in the greenhouse, where she transforms into this horrible creature with long limbs, being able to crawl through walls and roofs, while also shooting swarms of man-eating insects at Ethan through her beehive crotch. Yeah, I think that's the best way to describe it. This battle is pretty tough, and she puts up a very good fight. You know, Jack Baker and Evelyn may be the Resident Evil 7 antagonists, But damn, even then, Margaret was still able to stand out on her own perfectly fine, which is why she's the 7th spot on this list. I'll confess, I still haven't played Resident Evil 6. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, I'll let you decide. But again, as I said earlier, through the years I read every single entry about every single enemy in this franchise. And of course, I've watched the entire story of RE6 online. Despite its reputation, the game still has some monsters that catch my eye. Some due to how resilient they are, others due to how ridiculous they look, but there's one particular BOW that stands out above the rest. The bioweapon House. This monster is beyond incredible. He has to be one of the most nightmarish designs in the whole series. House is a giant creature that has a half-human, half-cephalopod body structure, having translucent skin that exposes his insides, a bunch of tentacles that cover his body, with his defining feature being the humanoid skull and eyes that adorn his head. In a way, he kinda reminds me a bit of the Water Grade from Pikmin 2, just with the scary factor cranked up even further. House was a creature created in an underwater facility by Carla Radames with one goal in mind: to spread the sea virus all over the world. Something he could easily achieve in just a matter of days. On top of his insane size, House is also one of the strongest and most resilient BOWs that Resident Evil has ever seen, as he's able to change his size to give chase to Chris and Pierce, having the ability to quickly heal his wounds, as well as being able to tank heavy firearms without any issue, with his only notable weakness being electricity. I can't say much for his fight since I haven't played this game yet, but House has always stood out to me for everything that I just talked about. Incredible design, extreme resilience, and being able to easily destroy the world. He was an eldritch horror come to life. And you know what the most messed up part is? By the time you fight this creature, he was only at 70% completion. Imagine how invincible he would have been if his mutation had been fully completed. That's very messed up. I'm not gonna waste a lot of time on this one. Dr. Salvador, also known as the Chainsaw Man. No, but seriously, I talked about this in a previous Halloween video, but if you were to ask me who was my biggest childhood trauma of them all, I'll instantly tell you the Dr. Salvador. It's a long story, and also very similar to my experience with the Hunters, but to sum it up, one day I ended up watching a video with my cousin about all Leon's deaths in Resident Evil 4. I saw so many of them, which made me develop a strong dislike towards gore in general, especially when it happens to playable characters. But among all those deaths, the one that got me the most was the decapitation of the Dr. Salvador. I was totally terrified, going as far as having nightmares about this enemy. The trauma was such that even to this day, I always tense up a lot whenever I come across chainsaws in video games. Oh, and if I know an enemy can insta-kill me in any game, man, I'll go full panic mode. And I'm serious. In Resident Evil, it isn't just the Dr. Salvador. There's the Super Dr. Salvador, the Chainsaw Sisters, the Chainsaw Magini, the Skag Dead, hell, even that Mexican guy from Revelations 2. I know he's using a drill, but same thing. Insta-kill attack. He makes me nervous. That's why the Dr. Salvador is on the top 5 of this list, because even if I know when to expect them, even if I know how to deal with them, that doesn't exactly make the experience any less painful to me, because I know that just one slip up is all it takes for my head to be cut off. Or be impaled in some cases, but you get it. This enemy single-handedly left me with some scars that never healed, and that's gotta give him some credit. If you were to ask me, I think Resident Evil 8 had a bunch of really entertaining antagonists. Mother Miranda was cool, Moreau was thoroughly disgusting and had a fun battle, and Donna Beneviento, she was also nice. But of course, if you were to ask me who's the best RE8 antagonist, that title will belong to the one, the only, the incredibly sexy Carl Heisenberg. I know RE8 went too far with its creatures. You had werewolves, vampires, Satan. But Heisenberg is so over the top that I can't help but love him. He's literally just Magneto in Resident Evil. It's so over the top and ridiculous that I can't help but love it. And no, I'm serious! Heisenberg has full control over metal objects, both for offense and defense. He can wield insanely heavy weapons with ease, engulf himself in metal objects, can create vortexes with his magnetism, and so much more. But on top of that, Heisenberg is just a very entertaining villain. Whenever he shows up in a cutscene, he steals the entire show, having a lot of fun lines as well as a very memorable voice. And if that wasn't enough, he's also very interesting, as he's the only one of the village lords that actually despises Mother Miranda and wants to take her down with his army of cyborg zombies for ruining his life and the village. He even tried to persuade Ethan into joining his cause since both share a common goal. But since his plans involve using Ethan's daughter as a weapon, he of course won't have any of that. His battle is so damn cool, probably one of my favorites in the series, as Heisenberg mutates into a giant creature covered in metal. So in order to be on equal ground, Ethan operates a heavily armored vehicle to stand a chance, and it is so cathartic! However, eventually Heisenberg manages to overpower Ethan and you're forced to fight him by foot, which is both tense and insanely fun, as it also triggers one of the funniest insults in the entire series.
Why my lordy? That boulder punching asshole! But you're first!
And once enough damage has been dealt to him, he creates a whirlwind of metal that lifts everything and everyone into the air. And as he's about to kill Ethan, the latter manages to grab a piece of the armored vehicle and lands one final blow on Heisenberg, ending him for good. And can I just say how much I love the contrast of powers here? When Ethan rejects Heisenberg's proposal for the last time, the latter replies with,
"You're futile."
But during this battle, just as he thinks he's about to win, Ethan finishes him off by saying, "Dude, it is so cool! Everything is so cool! God, I really love Resident Evil Village! What an insanely good game!" And Heisenberg was easily one of the best highlights of it. Resident Evil 7 was a magical experience for me. I didn't know what to think at first of the change to a first-person perspective, but by the end of it, I found a fantastic game that I still love and remember fondly to this day, thanks to its great design, fun challenges, memorable set pieces, and incredible villains, with the one standing above them all being Jack Baker himself.
Welcome to the family, son.
He's someone who excels in every single department. Jack Baker is comparable to the likes of Nemesis and Mr. X, an enemy that constantly stalks you throughout most of the game, and you can't do much against him other than to run away. But what makes him stand out above those two other iconic monsters is the fact that Jack is actually capable of speaking full words besides stars, and as such, he ends up having a lot of great banter and dialogue with you. He's someone that clearly enjoys what he's doing and won't miss any opportunity to screw up with you in any way he can. He laughs at you if you try to fight back. There's a moment in which he cuts off your leg and gives you a first aid spray to heal it back, just so he can continue to toy with you. There's an insane cutscene where he forces you to shoot him in the mouth, and so many more quotes and moments that make Jack an unforgettable character. And that's not even mentioning how frightening he is through gameplay. You have him chasing you all over the baker's house. There's the battle in the garage, the battle in the morgue. He's so insane, with him wielding a chainsaw scissors weapon. This entire moment had me constantly screaming due to how tense and scared I was. It was awesome! And once you think he's finally done for real, he manages to return later one last time in his mutated form, where you finally put an end to him once and for all. And then he comes back once again in the DLC, where you finally put an end to his misery for real this time. And then, once all is said and done, after all those scary moments and crazy battles, you're hit with a tragic realization. Jack Baker is not actually evil. Not him, not the rest of the Bakers. Well, except for Lucas, but still. They were actually all very nice people. They did not wish to bring harm to anyone, but Devlin's corruption forced them to commit atrocities, something he expresses a lot of regret for. It really hits different when you realize that the Bakers were also victims this entire time. Jack Baker is an excellent monster. He basically has all the qualities I love about Heisenberg, except that he is a much more prevalent threat throughout the course of his game, which gives him a stronger impact and puts him on the third spot on this list. I wanna ask you something. What's the most scared you ever felt while playing a video game? I know I said that Dr. Salvador left me a permanent trauma when I was a child, but even so, nothing has come quite close to the monster that takes the second spot on this list. Two words that can make both Resident Evil fans and Metroid fans scream in panic, and that is...
The baby. The baby. And the baby. The baby. The baby. The baby.
The baby from Resident Evil Village is without a doubt the scariest experience I've ever had in my entire life. I'm dead serious. And I mean, can I be blamed? Just look at this thing. A big malformed fetus with underdeveloped limbs that can't stretch its mouth wide enough to swallow a grown adult. This is horrifying. It also doesn't help that when you encounter this creature, it is very dark, so it is difficult to figure out how it is supposed to look. And to make matters worse, throughout his encounter, they're constantly making baby noises, feeling happy when they're chasing you and starting to cry when you manage to shake it off. It's beyond scary and stressful. The baby's encounter in House Beneviento after Ethan starts to hallucinate due to exposure to some infected plants. And this entire sequence is just genius. Not only because they build up this monster extremely well, but because you're completely stripped away out of your weapons. So once the creature shows up, you have no other option than to run away. And this exact same reason is why this experience was the scariest I've ever felt in my entire life. I have a video of that stream session if you wanna check it out, but if you're curious, here's a quick summary. I was home alone, it was dark outside, my only company were like 2 or 3 people on Twitch, and for a while I was already aware that Resident Evil Village had a very specific baby monster that everyone was afraid of. To my surprise, I didn't know that section happened during the first half of the game, and when it happened, dear lord! As soon as I got to House Beneviento, I was already fearing the worst, saying out loud, man, I hope this is not the baby section already. Eventually, everything went quiet, with no other sound than my own footsteps in the game. And as I kept uncovering more mysteries and solving puzzles, the atmosphere continued to get more tense and darker. My mental health was a total mess at this point. I was so shaken by the situation that I was constantly pausing the game, telling to myself that I couldn't do it. I can't. I was even trying to joke with the audience just to calm myself and alleviate the situation, but it was all pointless. I was so damn scared. And when the baby eventually showed up... That was the moment I broke down. I was at my absolute lowest point mentally. So much in fact that my hands paralyzed in fear and I was actually getting a panic attack on stream. I even needed some time to actually breathe in just so I could calm down. Somehow I managed to do the rest of the sequence while I was in full panic mode and managed to avoid the baby without dying, but not before leaving me one last scare. Hurry! It's so damn funny to look back at these moments nowadays, because the baby is relatively easy to avoid, and when you learn some of his movements are scripted, it diminishes his impact a bit. But back then, I didn't know that. All I knew is that there was a baby monster that made everyone shit their pants. In my case, he gave me the biggest scare in my entire life. So you know, it was also kinda nice that the Shadows of Rose DLC has a similar section where you must avoid a bunch of scary dolls. One panic attack wasn't enough? Don't worry buddy, we'll make you go through it all over again. So yeah, shout out to the dolls in the DLC. And you know what the most messed up part is? As I said earlier, this monster shows up after Ethan starts to hallucinate from the Beneviento plants. This heavily implies that this monster didn't even exist in the first place, and it was just Ethan's subconscious messing up with them. And even so, despite not being real, the baby manages to be not just the scariest monster in all of Resident Evil, but probably in all of gaming in general. And yet, there is one more creature that takes the top spot. It may seem generic, you may disagree with me, but please, let me explain. Yeah, I know this pick might not seem surprising at all, and might even seem like I'm cheating, but please, let me explain. I consider Wesker a monster for very obvious reasons. After being supposedly killed by the Tyrant in the first Resident Evil game, Wesker managed to cheat death by previously injecting himself with the T-Virus, which resurrected him while also giving him enhanced speed and strength, to the point where he's literally able to do Matrix stuff. By this logic, he can easily be considered a bioweapon, a monster, or even a mutant if you will. I won't go too in depth about his backstory, motives, his betrayal of stars, and everything he does until his eventual death at the volcano, but instead, I'll just tell you why Wesker is my favorite antagonist in all of Resident Evil. Wesker is a villain that fulfills his role so damn well. From his introduction until his eventual demise, he remains as a constant force that somehow influences every story he's in. In Resident Evil 0 and 1, where he's more directly involved with the ongoing story. In 2 and 4, where he keeps tabs on Ada Wong so she can bring him samples of the G-Virus and Las Plagas respectively. In Code Veronica, he manages to retrieve a strain of the T-Veronica virus. Even in Operation Javier, he's the one responsible for helping Krauser to mutate into the monster he becomes in 4. And in the Umbrella Chronicles, he's heavily involved with the downfall of the company and with the data he acquires from them in conjunction with Las Plagas he got in RE4, led to the events of Resident Evil 5, where he is the main antagonist. On top of that, Wesker is just so damn entertaining. In every cutscene he appears, he's the star of the show. Whether it be because of his lines, because of how insane he is, and even his relationship with Chris is so much fun to look at. But my absolute favorite part about Wesker is how over the top he is. His design, like, come on, how can you not love an antagonist that constantly wears sunglasses even indoors? There's all the flippy Matrix stuff he does during combat, but his voice actors always manage to be entertaining, but for different reasons. In the first game, where the voice acting is generally terrible, I can't help but love that.
Chris? Stop it.
And I don't know if he's controversial or not, but DC Douglas as Wesker is simply perfect. He really sells the role, having so much fun in every single line he says, which makes a lot of his quotes so iconic.
Ouroboros will be released into the atmosphere, ensuring complete global saturation.
Wesker is the embodiment of everything I love about Resident Evil. He's over the top, very entertaining, genuinely threatening, and is just so damn cool. It's insane that more than 10 years after his defeat, he remains as one of the most iconic faces in the series. Sure, he may not be as scary as the goddamn baby, but he manages to be very memorable in so many different games, but for different reasons, which grants him the first spot on this list. Okay, now that you heard me nerd about Resident Evil monsters, I think it's only fair that I listen to you nerd about Resident Evil monsters, so which Resident Evil monsters are your favorites? Is there a pick you disagree with on this list? Please let me know in the comments, and will you do that? Thank you so much for your time, I really hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to support the channel, you know you can do so by liking, sharing, commenting, subscribing, or Patreon. Have a wonderful day, and take care! I'll see you next time!